Hey, good morning. Well, it's morning where I'm at. It's good morning right now. I wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit about labels. One of the things I've noticed is that there's certain groups of people, organizations, belief systems that like to label things, right? There's a lot of phobias in those labels. And I think the reason that they do these labels, the phobias, is because they either don't have the intellect to describe what exactly it is that they're trying to say. And the other part of it is that they know they're wrong. And the easiest way to shut down a conversation is just throw a label out there. And what I mean by label is, they want to, you're a homophobe, xenophobe, picophobe, any of those things. You're a racist, you're a bigot, you're a misogynist, you're a feminist, you're a libtard, you're a MAGA Republican, whatever those are, right? There's tons of labels, and we all use them. But the reason we do is because nobody can have a real conversation. Nobody knows how to have a real conversation. Nobody knows how to defend their position. And the idea that it's a phobia is kind of ludicrous. Because I had a nephew that had a real phobia. I used to have a phobia, acrophobia, fear of heights. So I eventually got over it for the most part. There are still some situations I don't enjoy being in when I'm in, like I said, certain situations, and it's super high. But I had a nephew that was deathly afraid of riding in an elevator. And that's a real fear. But when people disagree with people's positions on certain things, like mutilating children or allowing them to read pornographic material in a school, they want to label you because they can't defend their position, because there's no logical explanation or reason or excuse that you could come up with for why you feel that way or believe that. And you'll notice whenever they try to defend their position on these goofy things, is that they do this circle around thing. They make it about something that it's not. They can't talk about the actual subject itself, but they want to go around the subject and try to paint this picture. They're just basically talking in circles because they know that if they say what they actually believe out loud, how ridiculous it sounds. So we have to be careful with our labeling, because these labels are meant to belittle people. They're meant to make them feel less than. Like everybody in their house, most people I would say, have a junk drawer. And your junk drawer is just a drawer that you put stuff that doesn't really have a place to go by itself. You might have a measuring tape in there for something. You might have a couple of screwdrivers in case you need to tighten the knob on a kitchen cabinet or something. You might have a small little sewing kit, all kinds of things. Little batteries, you got batteries in there, right? This is just your junk drawer, because you're not going to have an entire space dedicated to these individual items. So we've labeled it the junk drawer. And the label itself is not really accurate. It's not junk. It's just stuff that doesn't really have a home of its own. It doesn't make sense. You're not going to go buy a plastic container to put 2 rolls of Scotch tape in, because that's where you just keep a roll of Scotch tape just in case. So we have these junk drawers. Well, we call them junk drawers because it's just a bunch of stuff that, and eventually we do collect junk, because you're like, should I throw this out? Should I not throw it out? And it does end up getting kind of junky. But the point is that these labels are very dangerous because they're just used flagrantly, just willy-nilly, just use these labels. And most of it's because of fear of having a real conversation and really digging into what is that. why is it that someone says the things they say? The other thing is that we twist things around. We make things seem worse than they are because we want to shut down the other side. Simple. If someone says something that is bias or prejudice, it automatically gets labeled race. You're a racist. Is it though? Because we all have biases. See, we've bypassed the definitions that allow us to talk about things. So you have a bias. Why do you have a bias, right? So you can have a conversation about that. You can say, well, it's because of X, Y, and Z. When I was a kid, this is a situation I was in many times, and so I have a bias against that. I don't have a phobia. I'm not afraid of it. But people don't want to have that conversation. People want to have a conversation. Well, why did you say that or this or that? Why do you feel that way? Because they don't want to have a conversation, because they're not really interested in hearing what you have to say. They just want to shut you down. Because hearing what you have to say might actually mean they have to engage and try to do some introspective on themselves and see why do they feel like they do. And they're not going to defend their position because they don't want to. They don't have the time to. They haven't really thought about it. Today we have a bunch of kids running around that have no idea why they believe what they believe. They just believe it. They can't defend their position, so they just say whatever, and they throw out these names. And our universities are perpetuating this, and it's not an accident. It's certainly on purpose. They want to create a generation of youth and kids that grow up to be young adults that just continue to perpetuate all these ridiculous things, throwing out these labels. It reminds me of when I was younger, they had these label makers, and it was basically this roll of material, it was like this thick as a roll, and they had these little label guns, and on the top of it, it had the alphabet and numbers, and you just turn it to A, click, pull the trigger, and it would make an A in this thing. And I remember when those came out in the 70s, well, what I remember in the 70s, they may have been before then, but I remember there were certain people, like, once they get their hands on one of those, you couldn't get it out. You'd go, they had a label for everything. I mean, they were labeling their lunchbox, all these things, right? Because they just got overzealous with this label thing. And that's where we are today. But it's different because it's a social thing. It's affecting us as a country. And we have to stop this. We cannot continue to just throw out labels. People have their feelings and their beliefs rooted in something. At least sane people do. Now, the people that run around screaming, throwing all these names out there, these phobias, they have no idea what they're talking about. They don't even know what that is. Phobias are fears. People don't fear the things that they don't agree with. And it could be someone's lifestyle. It could be anything. They just don't agree with it or don't understand it. Now, I remember I grew up in Michigan. I lived in Arizona for a couple of years. But I grew up in Michigan. I grew up in the country. We didn't have a lot of diverse culture in our school. In my high school, there was 3 black kids, and if there was anybody that was Hispanic, Latino, I don't remember. But when I moved my senior year to South Florida, it was a culture shock for me because it was extremely diverse. And I'll be honest with you, I was afraid to say anything to anyone because I was afraid to offend someone. Culturally speaking, I didn't know, because I didn't know that culture. Now, when I lived in Arizona, I would say 95% of the kids I hung out with at school were either Mexican or Native Americans. But I was 8 and 9, right? And they were my friends. It didn't mean anything. When you're a kid like that, it doesn't mean anything. It's not until you get older that all of a sudden the world starts to set in and you start watching all this garbage on TV and all these other things, and then you start to get indoctrinated, and you don't even realize you are. And so my only experience with dealing with the black community, and I don't even like saying community because it's not. It's just I'm white. I don't have a community, you know. I live in a neighborhood, and there's all different cultures that live in our neighborhood. It's very diverse here. So I don't want to say community, but I didn't have much interaction with black people. And so my only interaction was like what I saw on TV, the Jeffersons, Good Times. So I didn't really understand. I didn't know. I was afraid to say anything to anyone. And that's what happens to people, is that when you don't have interaction, you don't have conversation with people, and you don't get to know them on a personal level, then you don't understand the culture, you don't understand them as people. And so it's easy to have bias because someone from some certain ethnicity at some point in your life did something to you. Whether it was intentional or not, most of the time I think it's unintentional. I think we're just oblivious as people walking around. I think we do it all the time. I think a lot of the things that people think are intentional are just unintentional. Listen, we're just not that smart. We're not that in tune with what's going on. We're just in our own world half the time. No, 90% of the time, we're in our own world. As individuals, we're just going around. We offend people all the time. Not intentionally, not because we meant to, just because we're just not aware of what's going on around us. We're just kind of in our own space. We got things to do, and we're just kind of going through and doing them. So I think a lot of things get, this whole racist thing and all this bigoted stuff, it's a bias from someplace. And there are people out there that are truly racist. There are men out there that are truly misogynist. There are women out there that are truly crazy feminists. And I say crazy because you listen to them talk, and they start talking about things like, we don't need men. We could live without men. Well, yeah, I could say the same thing. I could live without a woman too. But could I really? I can feed myself. I can clothe myself. I can do all the things I need to do to survive. I can build anything I need to build. That's not a problem. But the women that are out there that say that, they're the crazy feminists that say, oh, we can't do this. When you look at, 99% of the labor force that builds everything are men. They kind of forget that. But I don't concern myself with that because I realize they haven't really thought it through. And they're just kind of going off of what someone else said. But we have to get away from these labels. Because labels is just a cop-out. That's all it is. It's just a way to not have to engage. You don't want to have a conversation with someone and understand why they feel the way they do. So you just label them, and then you can just neatly stick them in that junk drawer, and you don't have to worry about it. Right? How many times you walk by your junk drawer and you think, oh, I really need to clean that thing out and get it organized and sift through it and get rid of some of the real junk that's in there and organize and keep the stuff that's useful. How often do you do that? Quite a bit. And so it's the same thing with all these other things, right? You don't want to have these conversations. You don't want to clean that drawer out. And cleaning that drawer out means you actually have to have a conversation, like an in-depth conversation, like a real conversation. Not where you're thinking about what you're going to say next, but you're actually listening to the other person. Because that's the problem with our culture and our society, is that when we're having conversations with people, we're not listening to what the other person is actually saying. We're just waiting for our chance to respond, because we already know in our head what they're going to say, because it's the same old thing over and over and over again. When my wife and I were at a point in our marriage where we didn't like each other, we went to counseling. And we just got fortunate. We got a really good counselor, a really cool guy. And he didn't tell us what our problems were. He made us figure it out. And one of the things that he made us do was he made us do a couple of these simple steps, mirroring. I would say something, my wife would say something. We'd have to repeat back what we heard them say, and many times what they were saying, what she was saying or I was saying, was not what I heard, because I already had a preconceived notion in my head. Or sometimes we use words that maybe the definition is a little bit off. Maybe we think it means this, but it doesn't really mean that. Or in our head, we just hear what we want to hear, which is something negative. And so I learned through this that in order to really understand people, you have to be willing to sit down, shut your mouth, and open your ears so that you can hear what the other person actually has to say. But we don't have time for that. Can't do that. Because part of the problem is that if you sit down with somebody, you have a real conversation, there's a very good chance you are part of the problem. Nobody wants to hear that. And the reason nobody wants to hear that is because this means that once you sat down and you've had a conversation with somebody and you realize that you are part of the problem, you're going to need to take steps to fix that. That means you're partially accountable for whatever this is that's going on. And that means you're going to have to put effort into changing. Yikes. Who wants to do that? Not this guy. So it's hard. So that's why we throw all these labels out. Because we don't want to have that conversation. It's not even so much about the other person. It's more about us, honestly. If I get into a real in-depth conversation with somebody, with one of my friends, then we have to be real and have to understand, like, where they come from, what's their perspective. And my friends are from diverse cultures. I don't have a lot of friends, so to speak. I'm just not a likable person, I think. No, I'm just kidding. I'm probably not. I just don't have a lot of friends. I got married at 21, had 3 kids by the time I was 24, so I spent most of my youth, when I say youth, my 20s and 30s raising kids. And now six grandkids later, my priorities are different. I just don't have time for a lot of friends. I have a handful of friends, and a very diverse group of friends. And I like that, because we're all just human beings, come from different backgrounds. And what I like about it is that we can have real, honest conversations. I'm not into these surface conversations. I'm into being honest and real, like I am trying to do today. I don't want to have superficial relationships. And that's what labeling does. Labeling allows us to have superficial relationships. because we don't want to deal with what's inside of us. I mean, that's the honest truth. We're messed up. We're broken people. Listen, I don't know what percentage of people were molested as youths, but it's pretty high. That's a big burden to carry around. People grew up in single-parent homes, abusive homes. Everybody has all this stuff, right, that they're carrying around. And in order to get into a conversation with somebody and really get to the bottom of it, you got to dig all that stuff up. It's really hard. And I encourage everyone to do that, to find someone or some outlet that you can use to share your story. Because the more you're able to share your story, the more healing comes with it. And I can tell you that from personal experience. I grew up in a home where my dad was kind of around, but not really around. When he was around, he was drunk usually. He was an angry drunk. He wasn't an engaging father. He never did anything with me. In all my years of growing up playing sports, he attended one basketball game when I was in 5th grade, I think. I think that was pretty much the extent of his interaction with me in sports. Now he would take me fishing, we'd go fishing and stuff, but it always involved his buddies, right? Because my dad hung out with his buddies. That was his family. So for me, there's a lot of things that I grew up with that I had to deal with, and one of the things I talk to myself. I have conversations. If you saw me walking around, you'd think, what the heck is that guy doing? Who's he talking to? Is there a ghost out there? But I had to train myself to have conversations, both two-party conversations. What I was going to say and what my dad was going to say. Because my dad was so over the top that I might just say something that just set him off. It could be the simplest thing. So rather than getting screamed at or belittled or told I was stupid or that was the most ignorant thing, the stupidest thing someone's ever said, I taught myself how to have these conversations so that I could play both sides and try to limit my liability. And what I mean by liability is the wrath of dad, right? I remember when I was in high school, we lived off of it was a 2-lane paved road, farmland mostly, one little small community that had maybe 100 homes in it, maybe, something like that, if that. But we were on a dirt road off this main road. So we'd get dropped off at what they call a party store, which is like just a convenience store, privately owned convenience store, beer, wine, liquor, all that kind of stuff, right? Like a 7-Eleven, but they could serve liquor and all that stuff. Not serve it, but sell it. So we'd get dropped off there, and it was probably a good quarter mile from there, walk home. And I remember walking down the paved road, and then I'd get to my road, it was a dirt road, and I could turn, as soon as I turned the corner, we were like the third house on the right, I could see if my dad's truck was there. And if my dad's truck was there, I just had to, figure out, what am I walking into? Am I walking into my dad sleeping because he might have just got off work and he's tired and he went to bed? Or am I walking home to dad that's just had 2 beers and a shot of whiskey and he's starting to feel happy? Or am I walking into pissed off, angry, belligerent, out of control, drunk dad? And that's how I grew up. I tell people I grew up in bars. And most people are like, what? What do you mean you grew up in a bar? Come on, did your dad own a bar? No, but my dad went to all these hole-in-the-wall bars, and you know the ones I'm talking about. We're not talking about today's bars, right? where they serve food and it's very bright and open. No. This is the 800 square foot, 900 square foot building with one window in the front door, like a 12 by 12 window in the front door. And you walk in and it takes 20 minutes for your eyes to adjust. It's so dark in there. Anytime we did anything, we would have to go to one of those bars, maybe two. I remember I was probably must have been about 10. And my dad bought me a basketball hoop for my birthday. Now it's just the rim, right? Because back then people just made their own backboards. You're not gonna spend all this money on a backboard. Just go plywood and a couple of 2x4s, mount it to the front of your garage, and there you go. So my dad said, "Hey, let's go to the lumberyard and let's get some wood. We'll make you a backboard." Okay, cool. So we get in the truck and we drive. The first thing we do is we stop at a bar. My dad has a beer, shot of whiskey. I get a Coke. And this is before you get refills. I never got any chips or peanuts or anything like that. He never splurged on that. And then we'd get back in the truck after 30 minutes and we would go to the lumberyard and get a sheet of plywood. And then we'd stop at a different bar on the way home. Same thing. And this is how I grew up. Learned how to play pool pretty young. Know how to operate a jukebox pretty young. But that's how I grew up. So for me, drinking was never a big deal. Like, didn't really, birthdays and things like that. By the time I was 20, like I said, by the time I was 21, I was married, so, and had kids by the time I was 3 kids by the time I was 24. So that partying lifestyle didn't really hang with me too much, other than like family weddings and stuff. But the point is that we all have these things, and I talk to myself because of the way I was brought up. And so we all have these things that make us who we are. And so when you start to label people homophobe, xenophobe, picophobe, doesn't matter what it is, you have no idea why that person has the position that they have. You just don't know. So you don't know if some point in their lifetime, growing up, or at any point in their lifetime, they have a legit reason for having a bias. But instead of having a conversation about it, you just label them. So let's try to be better. Let's try to be better and not label people. Let's take the time to have conversation. If you see somebody that you don't agree with, try to have a civil conversation unless they're just off their rocker. And sometimes you can't have a civil conversation with some people because they don't know how to have a civil conversation. They're the screamers, they're the ones just yelling, all these names. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your time with those people. Because they have no intention of learning anything from you or themselves. But if you have people that are close to you and you want to have that conversation, just a real conversation, why do you feel that way? I encourage you to do that. But before you do that, I encourage you to figure out and dig deep. Why do you feel the way you do? Why do you take the position that you do? Why are you anti? Why are you pro? Pick anything. That's not the thing you're anti and the thing you're pro is not important. What it is what's important is why are you? Why are you anti this or why are you pro this? And you should know it. And you should really, really do some soul searching into why you feel that way. And maybe you'll change your mind. Maybe you'll think differently. You might not do 180, but you might just change your position just a little bit. And if you're willing to do that, and you're willing to listen to what the other person has to say, we can probably learn a lot from each other. But it's got to be the right place, the right time to do that. But that's why I say figure out yourself first. Figure out why you feel like you do. Why do you feel so strongly about this? Because maybe, just maybe, you're the same as them. Just maybe you don't really know why you believe what you believe. Maybe your parents believe that. Maybe your grandparents believed it. Maybe you learned it in school. But you never really thought about why you believe what you believe. Take some time. Dig deep. Figure out why do you believe what you believe. You might even have to talk to yourself. Oh, join the club. It's a crazy world. Being in my head. But that's how I solve a lot of things. That's how I figure out a lot of things. Is by having these conversations with myself to try to figure out, why do I feel that way? Why do I believe that way? Whether it comes to business or personal life, family, work, whatever it is. I think it's important to really do some soul searching to figure out, why do you believe what you believe? And here's the hard part. If you've been hurt in your life by someone or something, more than likely someone, you need to go there. You need to recognize that maybe, just maybe, that wasn't your fault. I know for me, the moment that I was able to finally work through some of these childhood things that happened to me, I was able to start the healing process. You can see, once you acknowledge it and you come to terms with it, all the guilt, all the shame, it goes away. Because no one can say anything. See, we have these secrets that we keep. And we keep them protected. We put them in a box that we don't even open. And for a lot of us, we don't even know they're there. And so we put up this barrier. And we take on a personality that's not necessarily ours, our true personality, because we're putting up with this big defense mechanism. We're building the wall. And that's how we protect ourselves. But I'm going to tell you this. Protecting yourself, you're not protecting yourself. You're just causing yourself stress, anxiety, and you don't even know why. See these phobias that you have? Some of them you're just born with. My fear of heights. Oof. Man, talk about like real fear. When you have a real phobia, all this other stuff just seems silly. Because it's not a phobia. It's a misunderstanding. It's a bias, maybe. You're not afraid of it. I'm not afraid of illegal immigrants coming across the border. It's wrong. We have an immigration policy. I'm not afraid of them. I have people in my life, close friends, that came here the legal way. Argentina, Colombia, Venezuela, Chile, Mexico, all over the place. But they came here legally. I had employees that were working, doing the right thing to get their green card so they could stay. I had a woman that worked for me for 5 years for Uruguay. She was the sweetest lady. She could speak broken English, but her and I communicated very well, hardest worker I ever had, actually. An amazing person. And she was with us for 5 years and had to leave because our messed up system wouldn't give her and her husband a green card. And they both worked very, very hard. The government didn't give them a dime. And we have people coming across our southern border right now that are getting more than people get on Social Security when they retire every month. They've never done a day's work in this country. They walk across that border and we're taking care of them. That's not a phobia. That's not a fear of something. It's called logic. It's called compassion. It's called doing the right thing. And if you truly understood why they're doing it, you'd probably be pretty scared. And it's not what you think it is, and I'm not even going to get into that. But the point is that stop labeling people with all these crazy phobia things. Because it's not a phobia. Sometimes it's something more emotional that you grew up with as a kid. Somehow someone did something to you. Maybe you were beat up in a bathroom. Who knows? I don't know what it was. Picked on the bus. Picked on when you're on the bus. I don't know what it is. But there's a reason people feel the way they do. And to label people, come on, that's ignorant. That means you're weak. You're a weak person if you throw labels around. You're weak because you don't either have the intellect to defend your position or to come up with a solid counterpoint. And I don't mean argument, I mean counterpoint to what their belief system is. If you can't articulate that, then you're either lazy, weak, or just don't have the intellect, or been brainwashed and don't know why you believe what you believe. It's pretty simple. So the point is, listen, stop labeling and take the time to spend with somebody that is different than you and figure it out. Ask questions. That's how you find out things. Just ask questions. What's that TV show? The soccer? Be curious, not judgmental. Yeah, be curious. So with that, go out and do your best you today. Be kind to others. And remember, most of the times when people do things, it's not intentional. I had a sales guy that worked for me, very short amount of time, but he used to carry those clown noses that you could just squeeze and had a slit in one side, you could stick it on your face. He always carried one in his car. And he said if he ever accidentally cut somebody off or whatever, he would put that clown nose on, and then when they went by him, he would just turn, look at him, and raise his hand in the air, like, to kind of lighten the load, like, hey, yeah, I'm a clown, sorry. So try to do that. Try to be a little less judgy. Don't get out your label machine. Start making labels for everything. Ask questions, be curious, not judgmental. And I think if we can all do that, it's a slow process, it's not going to happen overnight, but I think if we can do that, we can shape this world into a better place. Learn something about a different culture you didn't know before. Talk to your neighbors. Just talk to people. You'll find out amazing things that you didn't know before. May change your life. So with that, enjoy the rest of your day, evening, morning, whatever it might be when you're watching this, if you're watching it. And yeah, take it easy.